Someone's silence can be deafening. When someone ignores us, it's as if a veil of mystery descends, leaving questions unanswered, emotions hanging in the air, and an unsettling sense of invisibility. But what if silence isn't merely the absence of words? What if it conceals an entire inner world of conflicts, fears, and projections? Carl Jung, with his profound insight into the human psyche, invites us to look beneath the surface. Ignoring another person can often be an unconscious attempt to ignore oneself. In this video, we'll dive into the hidden mechanisms behind the act of ignoring to reveal what truly unfolds in the soul of someone who chooses silence. Get ready to see the unseen. If you've ever wondered what lies behind someone's silence, leave a comment. I see beyond what's spoken. Jungian analytical psychology offers a powerful lens for understanding human behavior, especially when that behavior manifests as silence or absence. On the surface, being ignored might seem simple enough, but through Jung's perspective, it is laden with unconscious symbolism. Ignoring is often a reflection of unacknowledged projections, inner contents the person cannot or will not face within themselves. According to Jung, we project onto others the aspects of ourselves we've repressed, traits we reject in ourselves, yet perceive clearly in someone else. When someone ignores you, that gesture may expose an inner confrontation with their own shadow, the parts they deny in themselves but can't bear to see reflected in you. Silence then becomes an attempt to manage this psychic tension. Moreover, ignoring can signal a flight from the process of individuation, the journey Jung described as the human path towards psychic wholeness. Avoiding another person may unconsciously mean avoiding oneself, especially when the other awakens deep-seated contents, whether positive or painful. The tension between what is repressed and what is revealed in the relationship can become so intense that distancing seems the only way out. Another crucial point is the imbalance between the inner masculine and feminine archetypes. A refusal to communicate may indicate conflict with the anima or animus, the unconscious images of the feminine and masculine dwelling in the psyche and shaping our emotional bonds. Through Jung, we learn that being ignored isn't only about how the other person feels about us, but about what they cannot bear to face within themselves. To Jung, ignoring someone may appear banal, but it reveals far more. Every human carries a shadow, a set of unconscious personality aspects repressed or denied over a lifetime. These traits don't vanish, they hide in the unconscious and surface indirectly. Silence is one such manifestation. When a person chooses to ignore someone, they can be driven by unconscious forces they don't even understand. Silence in this case can be an expression of the shadow, a defense mechanism against something that threatens internal psychic balance. When we encounter someone who triggers shadow aspects, insecurities, resentments, envy, or even admired but unrecognized qualities, the psyche reacts with withdrawal, as if to hide its own wound. This distancing is not only punishment of the other, it's an unconscious effort to avoid self-confrontation. Ignoring someone who shows us parts of ourselves we haven't accepted is like trying to flee from a mirror. In this context, the other becomes a reflection of what we prefer not to see. By falling silent, we deny not only the other, but what they reveal about ourselves. There is also a kind of silence born of shame. People who have endured trauma or developed rigid defense mechanisms for emotional survival often don't know how to handle deep feelings. If someone awakens intense emotions, positive or negative, the shadow leaps into action to protect the psyche, imposing silence as a containment barrier. The most intriguing part is that this barrier often isn't felt by the person erecting it. The one ignoring you may justify their behavior by claiming they're busy, tired, or simply not in the mood to talk. In truth, they may be wrestling with an internal avalanche that paralyzes them. Silence becomes a hiding place for their inner truth. It's not that they don't want to speak, they don't know how to approach you without touching painful depths. The shadow isn't solely negative. It often harbors undeveloped potentials, talents, creative impulses, or strengths repressed by fear or social conditioning. When someone confronts us with qualities we don't recognize in ourselves, we can feel a mix of admiration and rejection. To avoid that internal conflict, we choose to distance ourselves silently. Ignorance, in this sense, is a muffled cry of the soul, an unconscious plea not to be destabilized by what we have yet to integrate. The other's presence becomes disturbing because they activate something still lurking in the darkness of the unconscious. And, as Jung taught, whatever we refuse to face within is projected outward. Therefore, when someone ignores us, The gesture may be less about us and more about what they haven't dared to confront in themselves. Their silence can scream inner truths that for now are unbearable. This doesn't justify the behavior, but helps us view it with deeper compassion. The shadow is vital to individuation. Integrating it means becoming more whole, more authentic. The first step is recognizing that what we ignore in others is often what lies dormant or rejected within us. Silence then shifts from absence of words to an invitation to reflect. What does this relationship awaken in me that I can't yet embrace? The human mind is a complex structure where much of what we feel, think, and react with moves through invisible terrain, the unconscious. Jung devoted his life to understanding these hidden mechanisms and showed that we project onto others what we can't acknowledge in ourselves. This is the essence of projection, a pillar of analytical psychology, and it becomes especially clear when someone chooses to ignore another. When someone ignores you for no apparent reason, they're often reacting not to who you are, but to what you represent in their psychic universe. Projection acts like an inverted mirror. The other becomes a screen on which we imprint unresolved inner content. If that person sees in you traits they reject or fear in themselves, their immediate reaction can be repulsion, discomfort, or withdrawal, and silence is the most efficient way to handle that unease. Projections may harbor negative content like envy, anger, or resentment, but also positive content like admiration, desire, or idealization. In either case, confronting these emotions can feel so intense that the individual needs to sever the bond or step away. Ignoring is an attempt to wipe the mirror clean, even though the projected content remains inside. This process is usually unconscious. The person ignoring you may not understand why they're doing it. They might rationalize it with superficial excuses, saying we didn't click or I didn't feel it, when in reality something deeper was activated, the unconscious recognition of an unintegrated aspect of the self. For example, if someone grew up in an environment where vulnerability was seen as weakness, they may have repressed sensitivity and empathy. Encountering someone who naturally expresses those traits can feel threatening because it exposes a part of themselves they have suppressed. Their unconscious solution? Ignore, withdraw, silence. On the other hand, projecting idealized qualities can also create discomfort. If someone sees in you virtues they wish to develop but haven't, they may feel small or inadequate in your presence. Rather than consciously acknowledge and admire you, they reject and distance themselves. The other's presence becomes uncomfortable, not because they've done something wrong, but because they trigger an internal, painful comparison. This form of projection is still tied to the shadow, but expresses itself more subtly. Jung warned that the less aware we are of our projections, the more power we give them. We begin to see the world and people not as they are, but as distorted fragments of our own psyche. This creates an illusory emotional reality, where the other becomes the target of feelings that belong to us, not to them. Ignoring someone then becomes an unconscious way to escape one's own pain, one's own truth. The silence becomes armor against the mirror the other offers. That's why the discomfort we feel often isn't because of something the other did, but because of something they made us feel, something we're not ready to face. This mechanism is deeply human, but also a call to transformation. When we realize that what we see in others may be a part of ourselves we've denied, we open a door to self-knowledge. What was once ignored can become a key to integration. Ultimately, the pain someone causes us, or the pain of being ignored, almost always has an internal root. Recognizing this lets us turn discomfort into growth. Jung taught that what disturbs us most in others is often what needs the most attention within ourselves. At the heart of every silence lies an emotion without words. Ignoring someone may seem indifferent or cold, but through Jung's lens, it reveals an unconscious act of self-protection. The one who falls silent isn't always motivated by disdain, but by fear of exposure, of being seen in their entirety, of facing long-buried wounds. Ignoring, in this sense, is a fortress erected to hide one's own vulnerabilities. Emotional vulnerability is delicate territory. From early on, we learn to hide our feelings, especially if they make us appear different, fragile, or inadequate. Instead of embracing our emotions, many of us learn to stifle them. Over time, we develop defenses to avoid situations that might bring those feelings to light. One of those defenses is emotional distancing, disguised as silence. When someone triggers deep feelings, love, admiration, anger, or fear, the intensity can be frightening. To protect itself, the psyche chooses denial. As a result, the person retreats, cuts contact, ignores, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. The emotional intensity activates unconscious contents they're not ready to confront. This defense is common in people who were hurt in past relationships or who grew up in environments where expressing feelings brought punishment or rejection. Past pain shapes a psychic structure that equates intimacy with danger. Unconsciously, they avoid any relationship that might bring them back to that vulnerability. So they withdraw before they're touched, preferring to ignore the possibility of connection rather than risk being hurt again. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, requires integrating repressed emotions, including accepting vulnerability. Ignoring someone who awakens intense feelings can signal that the soul is still maturing, trying to find ways to handle emotional depth without losing balance. There's also an important aspect related to fear of judgment. Approaching someone who sees beyond superficial masks can feel exposing, as if they have direct access to the soul. Such connection can be incredibly transformative, but also terrifying. Rather than allow it, the person recoils. Silence becomes a way to maintain control over the image they want to project. Ironically, by trying to protect themselves through silence, they often perpetuate their own suffering. They isolate not only others, but themselves. Silence turns into a lonely place where nothing enters and nothing escapes. But as Jung said, what we resist persists. Unexpressed emotions continue to operate beneath the surface, shaping behaviors, decisions, and relationships. Ignoring is therefore the act of someone who hasn't yet found a safe way to be whole. The one who silences may be battling their own emotions, trying not to drown in their depth. In doing so, they end up distancing others, and with them the chance for emotional growth. Silence here is not detachment, but inner conflict. Understanding this lets us look at those who ignore us with less judgment and more compassion, not to excuse harmful behaviors, but to recognize we're often dealing with someone who doesn't know how to face themselves. Emotional vulnerability is our common bond. To flee from it is to flee from truly meeting another and ourselves. Silence in relationships is rarely mere absence. More often it's an expression, a silent, unconscious expression laden with meaning. Carl Jung reminds us that two fundamental archetypal figures inhabit the psyche: the animus, representing the masculine principle in a woman's psyche, and the anima, representing the feminine principle in a man's. These aren't simple opposites, but bridges of integration between internal polarities, and they deeply influence how we relate to others, and especially how we react when we feel emotionally threatened. Ignoring someone can be a direct response to an intense activation of anima or animus. When these archetypes project onto an external person, we feel an inexplicable pull, a psychic attraction beyond reason. But if we're unprepared to handle that internal intensity, we may reject, flee, or silence. The other becomes symbolically a mirror of our unconscious. Animus and anima also mediate between ego and unconscious. When they're not integrated, they manifest distortedly, creating conflict in our relationships. A man who hasn't integrated his anima may find a woman threatening or over-idealized, projecting onto her both his vulnerability and his longing for wholeness. If she triggers emotions he can't understand, he may withdraw or ignore her, as if ignoring her equates to escaping transformation. Likewise, a woman unintegrated with her animus may project onto a man qualities like authority, logic, or control. If he confronts her with inner strengths or vulnerabilities she hasn't accepted, the bond becomes intolerable. Silence becomes a psychic barrier against the collapse of an idealized image. Such dynamics intensify when there's unconscious identification with these archetypes. A man dominated by a negative anima can become overly sensitive and introspective, yet unable to express feelings clearly, preferring silence to confrontation. A woman dominated by a negative animus may react coldly or critically, silencing not out of indifference, but out of inner rigidity. In both cases, ignoring another reflects a struggle within their own psyche. Integration of these archetypal figures doesn't happen automatically. It demands awareness, self-reflection, and openness to the unknown. When we begin to realize that someone affects us not only for who they are, but for what they stir within us, we take a vital step toward individuation. The person who ignores us may in truth be trying not to face this inner other their relationship has awakened. Even a bond interrupted by silence carries deep symbolic value. It reveals the need to reconcile masculine and feminine within us. The animus and anima are bridges to wholeness. Each time we ignore someone who challenges us emotionally, we're, on some level, avoiding the encounter with these internal figures and what they represent in our psychic history. That's why silence is never solely about the other. It's about what the other activates in us, what remains unacknowledged, unintegrated, or untransformed. Jung invites us to listen to this silence as an archetypal language, speaking of the soul and its wounds. When anima and animus clash within, our external relationships inevitably mirror that inner chaos. The first step in turning silence from a wall into a bridge is to listen deeply to what it's trying to protect. Often ignoring is a silent cry for healing, and all true healing begins when we recognize the inner voices shaping our choices, our bonds, and our silences. Someone's silence can reveal more than 1,000 words. Behind that absence lies a soul in conflict, wrestling with shadows, projections, fears, and vulnerabilities that aren't always acknowledged. Jung showed us every gesture, every withdrawal, reflects what's happening inside the psyche. When someone chooses to silence us, they may unconsciously be trying to silence parts of themselves. By understanding the archetypes that inhabit us, the shadow that challenges us, and the emotions we fear, we create space to see the other with clarity and compassion. Emotional ignorance is not the absence of feelings, but a sign of an internal battle waiting for its voice. If this resonates with you, subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-knowledge and transformation, and don't forget to watch the video on your screen now. It will deepen everything we've discussed. True emotional freedom begins when we stop running from ourselves, because in the end, what another ignores in us is often what they haven't yet learned to love in themselves.